agnostics, long-haired weirdos, short-haired weirdos, vandals, hooligans.
The government, hug the government, love the government, hug the government, love the government, hug the government.
Welcome to The Politics Guys, a place for bipartisan, rational, and civil debate on American politics and policy. I'm Michael Baranowski, a professor of political science at Northern Kentucky University. I'm joined today by my conservative counterpart, Cleveland area attorney and defender of freedom, Jay Carson.
Hey, Mike. Good morning.
Hey, Jay. How are you doing this morning?
Well, after 15 rounds, victorious, right?
I guess if you're a McCarthy fan, yes, definitely so. And we will, of course, be talking about that as well as a bunch of other things today. There has been a few other things going on, though certainly the speaker voter votes have overshadowed most everything else. There was Chief Justice Roberts gave his annual report on the state of the federal judiciary. We're going to be talking about that and President Biden's judicial nominations 2 years in. I want to get your take on Donald Trump's full tax returns. And also, I think we should look toward the rest of the year, the sort of things we expect or not really don't expect because we wouldn't be expecting them. But anyway, what we think the big stories will be and maybe a few other things here and there. And we will get going with that in just 1 second. All right, Jay. So after 5 days and 14 failed votes, Kevin McCarthy is finally Speaker of the House in the 118th Congress. It's the first time in a century that a Speaker election has gone to multiple ballots, and those 15 votes it took are the most since that 44-vote marathon way back in, I believe, it was 1859. And of course, with a 10-seat margin in the chamber and the Democrats unified in opposition to him, McCarthy, well, he had to make more than a few concessions to get enough of those 20 anti-McCarthy Republicans to either support him or vote present, as a number of them ended up doing. He got 216 votes for him and 6 of those present votes. And Jay, you know, when we talked about the speaker vote at some point after the midterms, I think you predicted that Republicans would sort of figure this out behind closed doors in their caucus. And then, as almost always happens, right, certainly within living memory of pretty much everyone, that McCarthy would be elected on the first ballot. And that obviously didn't happen. So
I took the 100-year, this is what has happened every time. And
so why not? I mean, what's your, before we get into the specifics, why did this not get worked out behind closed doors? What's your take?
So I wish I had some insightful political reason to say, here's what happened. Here's why it didn't get worked out behind closed doors or on, the second ballot or something like that. But I keep just coming up with these people are idiots. And that might not seem to be like the real insightful political critique, but I think it may be accurate. And I'm struggling to come up with any other explanation.
Which people, when you say these people, there are a lot of potential idiots to go around. So who are you thinking of?
Yeah, there are. No, the McCarthy dissenters.
Okay.
In that.
Interesting.
Put it this way, there's a lot of blame to go around in that the rest of the party, not being able to corral them in the first place. But I'm not sure what this whole, mini rebellion was even about. If you look,
okay, that's interesting because I see it very differently than you do, and I think that's because this goes back to sort of my fundamental belief that you are desperately clinging. You're a desperate clinger, Jay, to this notion that the Republican Party in 2023 is even faintly resembles the Republican Party that you and I came up in. And I don't think it does. I don't think it has for quite a few years. And so using the logic of what you expect the Republican Party to be, well, of course, this makes no sense. But I think the logic of
that could be a fair criticism.
Okay.
Yeah.
So here's how I see it. When you said these people are idiots, the first thing I thought of was, well, one of the number one rules of running an organization a democratic organization, at least, which the House, is to make sure that you have your votes counted, have your votes in line.
Yeah,
before
don't
you take
the
vote
unless you know the outcome. Yes,
exactly. And so when you said these idiots, I thought, well, I don't know what kind of whip operation McCarthy had going on there, but clearly, if they took this vote without having nailed down those things, they're the idiots. So that's one way to look at it. But
I'll partially agree on that. But go ahead.
Okay. Well, another way to look at it is they knew they didn't have the votes, but they counted on at least enough of those dissident anti-McCarthy voters to feel the pressure and sort of get with the program in a public vote that they wouldn't want to sort of publicly be out there being anti-party and so forth. And that to me was a huge miscalculation as well, because it seems to me that pretty clearly there is a group of, around 20 people, right, in the Republican caucus who don't really care that much about the party per se. So that's another way to look at it, I think. So go ahead. You were going to.
So no, well, I would agree with you on the don't take the vote if you don't have the numbers. But I think also you reach a point, and this kind of goes to your second point, where you sort of call their bluff. If you're not going to have the numbers, okay, let's vote, and you guys can be out there, hanging out on the branch as the ones who are holding up a Republican speakership, which is sort of what he did. Although the idea that it goes this many rounds, this many times, and I guess I'm perplexed that, back when we talked about this before, I thought, there's going to be some people who are going to gripe and they're going to want concessions, and that's not super uncommon, right? But there was no deep ideological divide really driving this. No,
I disagree. I think, in fact, I have
what would be the ideology? I guess what's the issue that
the ideology
are standing for?
Yeah, the ideology is, if you will, is that these 20 folks want a more democratic House of Representatives, and the leadership wants a less democratic small d democratic House of Representatives. Yeah. And so I think this whole narrative that these people are awful and horrible and holding up, I find that I don't think they're idiots at all. I think that they did a reasonable thing. They looked at the numbers and they said, hey, we have a chance to leverage our necessary votes to get some things that we think are really important that we wouldn't get otherwise. And I'm not generally, saying more power to you, Matt Gaetz and
they're Matt Gaetz is the real hero here.
Well, and obviously there were a few people in that coalition who are sort of much more in it just to kind of promote their brand, if you will, and do other things. But I think there are also the Chip Roys and other folks who really do have sort of deep commitments to process. And, certainly that for a lot of people may not know this, that the House of Representatives is not really so much of a democracy. The leadership tends to have a very, very heavy hand. And I think what the Freedom Caucus folks, for the most part, they were Freedom Caucus folks, did was smart, was good politics. And like I said, more power to them. And honestly, it's the sort of thing that people sort of inside the Beltway political junkies think, oh my God, this is horrible, House in chaos, McCarthy humiliated. But to the vast majority of America, this is nothing. This is a little blip.
Oh, no. I agree with you on that. That this is much more an inside baseball story, right? And it's for political junkies. It's fun and the drama and all that. But no, to the average American, I don't think it makes a bit of difference. And I think a couple months from now, no one's going to remember, it was 15 votes, right? I mean, again, I think certainly not among our listeners, but I mean, I think among the populace in general, a lot of people would be hard pressed to name the Speaker of the House, right? So,
I mean, I think we're in a situation where, at least in the House, we have almost a three-party system. We have Democrats, Republicans, and Freedom Caucus Republicans. And that's how it works when you have a multi-party coalitional, basically the establishment Republicans have to form a coalition with the Freedom Caucus Republicans to get anything done. And it would be foolish to not use that leverage to get more of what you want and what you believe in. And honestly, some of those things seem pretty reasonable. Now, we're still waiting on.
No, I did want to talk about that because I agree with you on some of that. Some of those, I think, some of the reforms that they requested, I think, are smart and reasonable and beneficial. A couple of them are just headbangingly stupid. But.
Well, there are things that are symbolic. There are things that I think make a lot of sense, and we don't have all the details because the House hasn't voted on its rules packages, and so there are rules things. Then there are promises that are given, and those are not binding in any way. But let's start with what I think are the reasonable things. Like, for instance, one thing that's been mentioned is giving members 72 hours to look at legislation before there's a floor vote. That, to me, seems pretty...
I'm all for that, yes.
And I think a lot of people would probably think, my God, they don't have that already. No, sometimes you just say, hey, vote on this. No, it's good. We vetted it. Just shut up and get in line. And so I think that's reasonable, right?
I would say, I mean, there could be... detail issues to work out on that kind of proposal.
Well,
right?
Of course,
I mean,
there are always.
You always have, when you have, flurries of floor amendments and so forth and all that. But yeah, in principle, the idea that everyone ought to be able to read the bill before they vote on it, I think is a good one.
Yeah, absolutely. Or another thing that may be part of the formal procedure is allowing more open amendments on the floor. And now that could complicate things because, generally speaking, the leadership just likes to push things through as in a constrained manner as possible to not mess anything up, to have people put in poison pills or other things like that. But, I would argue, a part of legislating is being allowed to offer amendments and have them be voted up or down. So in principle, I'm okay with that as well.
Yeah, no, agreed. I like that as well.
There's also an interesting proposal. I don't know if this will get in from Thomas Massey, that if the House doesn't meet a budget deadline, that they would agree to pass a continuing resolution with 98% of current funding so that it would give them somewhat of an incentive to, actually get some sort of a package to put some sort of pressure on. And you and I in the past talked about some sort of incentive structure on CRs. And I think we ended up concluding that, I think it was like a lot of things we talk about. I was enthusiastic about it in some way, and you said, "Oh, I don't know about that." And then maybe I came around a little bit, but I don't know. What do you think about that one?
Well, I think that probably sums up where I am. I'm sort of,
And
no, I mean, to me, that strikes me as a little gimmick.
Yeah,
right?
I think probably
a little
so.
Gimmicky and not really enforceable.
Exactly. And that's when we get into that. I mean, just like calling for separate votes on each of the 12 appropriations bills, which is how it's supposed to happen. But what always happens is everything's rolled up into an omnibus because it's hard enough to get the votes for one thing. So that's one of those things that's a promise that I think is going to end up not being kept simply because you need the Senate to go along. It's just going to get messy, and that will go by the wayside is kind of my prediction there.
Yeah.
And
I would be all for that, return to regular order type stuff. But again, the problem is, one, you can always change, when Congress does this and makes its own rule changes, you can always change them back or override them with a simple majority. Now, you may or may not always have that simple majority, but it's one of those. I think when you're not talking about a leadership fight, when you're actually talking about legislation, I think there would be a tendency for the party to hang together, and some of these procedural things could well go by the wayside, or vote to suspend the rules to do this or that.
Yeah. And, there are some other things that I think are much more symbolic.
And not that doesn't mean it's a bad thing, because when you do have to take those votes to suspend, there's a political cost there, right?
Well,
so you can't do it too often.
I don't know how much of a political cost there really is, because it's sort of hard to run an ad against someone. So they voted to suspend the rules and on HR 1264 or something. Oh, well, my God, we can't vote for that person.
Well, no, but there's a political cost in that, when you've got this close of a this slim of majority.
Sure.
And everybody's got to hang together. There's going to be some people saying, well, yeah, I'll vote to suspend the rules, but here's what I want, right?
That's part of, I think, what drove things here is that this would have been, I believe, an entirely different sort of situation, even if Republicans had controlled the Senate. But the fact that they don't control the Senate or the presidency means that, aside from two things, the budget and the debt ceiling that'll come up this year, that Republicans don't really have to govern. And I think it's a lot easier to be out there, screaming hell no, when you know that there's really no chance of you being able to govern anyway. And honestly, there are a number of folks like the Boeberts, like though Green actually was voting for McCarthy, but there's a faction in the Republican Party in Congress that really, I don't think has much interest in governing and wouldn't necessarily know how to do it if they had the opportunity to do it. They're much more comfortable. It's a lot easier. It's a lot more fun to be screaming at the people in charge. But all of a sudden, when you're responsible for something, well, that's entirely different. That's a lot more difficult.
That is very true. I agree with that 100%.
And so that's why I think, like, on some of these proposals, they're going to be more, I guess, symbolic. Like, for instance, this idea that the House will present a budget that balances over 10 years. Okay, maybe they'll do that. Or going back to the fiscal year 2022 budget. Yeah, but also there are a lot of defense hawks on the Republican side who are going to say, no, we're not going to take defense spending back 10% or more, something like that. So these are things that I think are just going to end up not being able to. Sure, there's going to be apparently a vote on term limits, which is unconstitutional, but hell, we can vote on unconstitutional stuff, right? And so I think there are a lot of these symbolic sort of things that people will be able to go back to their constituents and say, that more importantly, right, the people who are giving them money say, hey, we got to vote on this, and it didn't go through because of those bastards, but we did this. So yeah, I think there's a lot of symbolic stuff. But a little less symbolic, though, is what apparently is the guarantee that there will be 3 seats on the Rules Committee not reserved for Freedom Caucus folks, but subject to the approval of the Freedom Caucus folks. And honestly, that to me isn't that big of a deal. Now, typically, people may not know this, is that most committees in Congress, most standing committees, and the Rules Committee is a standing committee, reflect the majority-minority ratios in the chamber. So this Congress is roughly 50-50. There might be 1 or 2 more Republicans on a committee than others. The Rules Committee has always been different. The Rules Committee is always stacked very much in favor of the majority party. I believe in the last Congress, it was 10 Democrats to 4 Republicans, and I would expect it would be about the same this time. And so that would mean that 3 of those 10 would be Freedom Caucus folks. But honestly, that's not that far off, because last I checked, the Freedom Caucus is around 25% of the Republican caucus anyway. So I just don't think this whole idea that McCarthy gave away too much and was negotiating with terrorists, and I just think it's kind of an overblown media narrative.
I think the getting seats on committees, that's sort of strikes me as that's the standard type of negotiations and concessions that you try to get when you've got, a contested speakership. And does it really change things altogether? No, but it allows other voices in the room. And I would agree with you on that I don't think that's an unreasonable demand. It might be kind of purely symbolic, but I don't think McCarthy, by agreeing to that, gives up much. Yeah,
and then that whole thing about allowing a snap vote to oust the speaker, again, that I don't think that's that big of a deal, or that's how it used to be before the Democrats took over, and that if you don't have the votes, you don't have the votes. And so it could maybe slow things down a little bit. But honestly, I don't think there's going to be the stomach for that. So to me, that's very much a symbolic thing as well. And I expect you would agree with that, right?
Well, no, I disagree with a little bit on that. It just it invites chaos, right? It's almost like a sort of a filibuster light. You know what I mean? Where you have one person who can, all of a sudden say, "Well, hey, I want a new speaker," and then everything's going to grind to a halt. So I think that's the problem. There is it puts that small minority in the position to say, "Listen, if I don't get X, then I'm going to, do this and just, throw a wrench in the works." And no, it's not going to come to anything. It's, but all of a sudden, whatever you're working on gets shoved aside, and it's you have this dumb speakership fight again. And
I don't see that happening. It's just because it's so small of a delay. And after a while, I think if someone tried to do it more than a few times, I think the internal pressure, even from that person's own Freedom Caucus, radical right, whatever you want to call it, colleagues, they would end up not doing that very. So I don't think that's going to be an issue. And that's how it was. Recall, that's how it was under the last two Republican speakers. And who, by the way, we should point out that the Freedom Caucus folks essentially forced out of they said Paul Ryan, and this job's no good. And John Boehner, went back to his Merlot and cigarettes and, that sort of thing. But I like I said, I think this is much ado about very, very little, an inside the Beltway thing. And honestly, I was fascinated. A lot of us, I'm sure listeners are fascinated. But in the end, now the House can get back to, with a tiny little delay, to the important business of looking at Hunter Biden's laptop. Yeah.
Well, again, my sense is I don't like that. I mean, I guess the other question would be the threshold that you need to call that snap election. And I suppose if it's one to 5, does 5 make it that much different? Nah. Not really.
One, you can have just basically, you're saying any jackass, sort of jump up and
any jackass who wants to get himself on TV for a brief period of time can do so.
Yeah, I don't think it's going to happen. That'll be my prediction. But in the end, like I said, I think
underestimate the jackasses.
Well, I don't think so, because even the jackasses are at least somewhat strategic about things. I don't think there's anyone in Congress who is just a flat out complete idiot. And that's even Marjorie Taylor Greene, who is clever in her own way, Jewish space lasers aside. But speaking of, it's a weird segue, but early on in this process, Donald Trump tweeted out I don't know what they call it, Truth Out, wasn't it, on Truth Social, his support for McCarthy, and it seemed to have absolutely no effect, even among people who were voting for Donald Trump for speaker and holding up Trump signs. I think Marjorie Taylor Greene did that at one point. So I wanted to get your take on that, the fact that Donald Trump said, "Hey, do this," and everyone just said, "What? Who?" Maybe they just don't have Truth Social accounts. I don't know. But what's your I don't. But what's your take on that, Jay?
No, my take is that Trump's influence is waning. And, Trumpism is sort of now bigger than Trump. I think this is of a piece with how the midterms turned out, right? You had the big Trump endorsed candidates who got significantly fewer Republican votes and fewer votes overall than your more mainstream candidates. I'm thinking like, Herschel Walker and compared to Brian Kemp. Mm-hmm. Right. I think it's just a matter of Trump has become and will be continued to become just more of a liability.
And yet, right. You know what I mean? And yet, the way the presidential primaries, particularly on the Republican side, are structured, Donald Trump still has a very reasonable chance of being the nominee.
Possibly, but looking at one, that's kind of a ways off yet, and two, looking at even early polls, shows DeSantis ahead of him.
Yeah, I wonder about some of
again,
those polls, especially
this is among the Trump, voters, right? Trump faithful type people. They're sort of fine with DeSantis in that he offers him sort of the Trumpian policies, a little bit of the Trump attitude, but not the crazy election denial stuff, and all the other things that go with Donald Trump.
Well, when you say crazy election denial stuff, just keep in mind that I think somewhere over half of the voters in your party believe to some extent in the crazy election denial stuff. So that's a mainstream Republican position.
Well,
so
maybe, but what I'm saying is Trump is not reaching that majority either among people who are getting polled or it doesn't have that poll among those dissenters who wouldn't even go along with it.
Yeah, I think that things might change a bit once, because DeSantis really hasn't been put into the fire at this point. I don't think in any very real sense. Trump's taken some shots and so forth, but I think things might change considerably. People know what they're getting, for better or for worse, than Donald Trump. Ron DeSantis is still, I think, somewhat of an unknown quantity to a lot of folks. Not perhaps us, not perhaps.
But here's the thing: it doesn't. But what I'm saying is, it doesn't have to be DeSantis. But the point is that to say that Trump has a stranglehold as the leader, he's not.
Oh, I think he still is until.
And usually at this stage, right? It is the guy with the biggest name ID. If it's a former president, that's who is the.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's unusual, I guess, that you'd have a former president trying to run again. It's not that it hasn't happened, but I would think that the natural front runner, if you asked Republicans, who should be the nominee in 2024, the first name off their lips you would think would be Donald Trump, but it's not, and I think that's significant.
Well, I don't know if I hope you're right or not. We talked about this before, but we shall see. I have learned to not count Donald Trump out prematurely, and I once burned on that in a big way back in 2016. I'm not going to make that mistake again. But anyway, I wanted to move on to something still related to this, at least the House Speaker thing, because we get a little bit off on the Trump stuff. But what do you think this tells us, if anything, about the upcoming debt ceiling vote? We don't know when that's going to happen, but we know that at some point in 2023, probably the second half of the year, Treasury is going to run out of various accounting and other sort of tricks, and we will need to raise the debt ceiling. And does this vote, the behavior of these 20 or so folks, tell you anything, give you any insight as to, make you more concerned about what might happen then?
Oh yeah. It's going to be a crazy week or two leading up to that, right? Of all kinds of crazy demands and brinksmanship and all that. I think we still passed the debt ceiling at the end of the day, but it's going to be, like I said, expect sort of grandstanding and brinksmanship from this crowd.
And it'll have very real effects, because when that happened back in 2011, the S&P downgraded the credit rating of the U.S. and the stock market took a pretty big tump. So this is not a symbolic, no consequences sort of thing. And I would expect that this standoff will be longer. I agree with you. In the end, we will raise the debt ceiling, because if push really comes to shove, a bill can be introduced to raise the debt ceiling and get it to the floor, through a discharge petition. And, and I think if you take a look at the structure of the House, even if, say, the Democrats introduced that bill, they could probably get 6 Republicans to go along. And there are right now, I think, 18 House Republicans who are in what are called crossover districts, meaning districts that voted for Biden in 2020. And so the math, I think the politics works out. It might take a while because to get a discharge petition to the floor, the bill has to be in committee for at least 30 days. Then there's a 7 legislative day layover before it. So what I'm saying, these delays matter, but in the end, I find it very, very difficult to conceive that a majority of the House will not in some way, shape, or form vote to increase the debt ceiling.
Yeah. No, it'll happen. But like I said, there'll be some drama getting there,
and there'll be some real costs. I think. I don't think this is going to be worked out in advance, behind the scenes before. And I guess that's the big lesson I take from this is that I can't see McCarthy and the leadership going to these folks and saying, "Listen, we saw the bad economic consequences of this in 2011. We want to avoid that. So can we work something out beforehand and just get a quick and simple vote?" I think they're going to want to use this as a way to grandstand, and it's going to hurt real people and their retirement accounts and all sorts of things like that. And that's I have a big problem with that, but I'm almost certain that's going to happen.
I agree with you.
Okay. All right. Well, we have other stuff we want to get to, and we are going to get to that, starting with Chief Justice Roberts' annual report on the state of the federal judiciary in just 1 second. All right, Jay, you know this. Listeners might not, but every year the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court releases a year-end report on the state of the federal judiciary. And in this year's report, Chief Justice John Roberts, he started by, there's a narrative that comes before all the facts and figures about workload. And in his narrative this year, he told the story of District Court Judge Ronald Davies, he was the guy who originally heard Brown versus Board of Education. And as you would expect, Davies faced tremendous public opposition, including, threats on his life from, segregationists. But he remained undeterred, did his job, all that sort of thing. And obviously, Roberts' message here is clearly, in my view, a response to the very real threats we saw against the justices in response to their rulings in Dobbs, like, Justice Kavanaugh comes to mind.
Yeah.
And I think that was entirely appropriate for Roberts to make this a theme of his report. But I got to say, I was disappointed that he didn't include even a mention, even a hint of the Dobbs opinion leak, or that, the allegations about a Hobby Lobby decision leak. So, Jay, what do you think? First, I guess, about what he did talk about, and then what he didn't talk about.
What he did talk about, to me, that's sort of the standard boilerplate kind of stuff that you say at these things. On the second, again, I guess I understand why he would want to avoid talking about those things, and maybe one take on it would be investigation is still going on. I'm not going to open up that box until we have an answer. That said, I still could have done stuff to reassure or to, I don't know, push back. I don't know. I guess if I'm him, I see the strategic decision he's making, right, in not bringing this stuff up at that forum. But I also see that by not saying it is sort of the elephant in the room, if you will. And so I'm not.
Yeah, because
first of all, I guess my general point is I'm not sure why the court needs to do this kind of thing in the first place. But
he does every year.
But it does, yeah. So no, I think this is just sort of this is an awkward year to do it. Maybe that's the best way to phrase it.
Yeah, I to recall in last year's state, the 2021 state of the federal judiciary, Roberts had no problem talking about internal court stuff, right? It was a big, long thing, at least for these sort of commentaries on recusal and the integrity of the court and all that. And yet this year, when there is a clear and obvious internal threat to the integrity and legitimacy of the court. It doesn't even merit, hey, by the way, remember I have this investigation, right? And Roberts,
right? I think you could have said, hey, we're working on this.
Except
integrity is important, and that's why we're working on it.
Yeah, exactly. And Roberts is supposed to be this great institutionalist, right, caring so much about the integrity of the court. And it made me wonder, well, what exactly ever happened to this leak investigation? He didn't, for one thing.
A lot of people are wondering that.
Yeah,
yes.
This was on May 3rd, so like 8 months ago, over 8 months ago at this point, Roberts appointed not a seasoned investigator or anything like that. Didn't ask the FBI. He asked the court's marshal, who is a attorney, but as far as I could tell, and as far as I was able to research, has no investigative experience of this matter. Put her in charge of this, and we have heard absolutely nothing since. And I think to a lot of folks, that seems highly questionable, given 8 months. And you have this person, what was this, an investigation in name only, some kind of updates, but we've had nothing. And I find that unacceptable.
Yeah.
And again, I feel like the court is this unaccountable, that the justices, many of the justices have this idea, well, we are above these sort of plebeian, transparency. Well, just trust us, trust us to recuse ourselves. Trust us when, that we don't have financial or any other conflicts of interest. Trust us that we're the good guys because we say we are. And that because we're Supreme Court justices. We're above it all. Yeah, and I have a big problem with that.
Why?
Okay, so I guess
will not stand.
Except
what are you going to do about it?
Except it will, right? I mean, the only real lever that Congress has over the court is in funding, and that's a very blunt sort of instrument, essentially. And so, I mean, I get that the court was designed this way, but this goes back to, I guess, to that idea that power corrupts, right? In its own very limited sphere, pretty clearly the Supreme Court is almost all powerful. And I would say, and I will not use the word corrupt, but certainly power, this sort of unchallenged power for so long, I think puts blinkers on people. And I think, John Roberts has been on the court for a long time, and a number of the other justices have. And I think they lose sight of the fact that they are human, and they do need some checks and somebody to say to them, hey, wait a second here. And if you don't get that for too long, bad things happen.
Yeah. I view it a little bit differently. And a lot of that goes to the power of the courts. And I think it was, I forget the Federalist one, 73 maybe. It's about the court, but relies entirely on its prestige and respectability with the public. And I can see someone like Roberts, who is an institutionalist, taking the position that, listen, if it comes down to airing our dirty laundry, that doesn't do any good for the court as an institution, for the rule of law as an institution. And that's why I don't want to say covering up, because I don't think that's the case, and I don't know that's the case, but perhaps de-emphasizing issues until you have definite answers.
Well, I see what you're saying, but I think there's a distinction to be made between de-emphasizing and what seems like burying.
Yeah.
And I guess, like I said, I don't think that Congress.
I want to know. I am as curious and concerned about the leak investigation as you are, perhaps even more. And I've got my theories on stuff, but again, I'm not gonna not gonna share them. But at least not at this point until there were more facts found. But
if there's not a real investigation and we don't know, it certainly wouldn't be revealing anything about. You don't have to reveal details of an ongoing investigation, but you could at least say, here is the team that is working on this, and here is when I have directed that they give an interim report or something like that, but it's been nothing. And again, I
think you don't want to do that.
Well, at least I think you need to do something, because right now it seems to me that Roberts has just decided that, well, we just hope this kind of goes away and that people forget about it. And again, that's I feel
and maybe in the you come back with you. Well, hey, guess we'll never know.
Exactly. Because too much time has passed, and there's a whole new set of clerks now, and so it's just become very difficult. The time to get answers is very close to the time where the thing happened, and with every month that goes by, I think that becomes a lot less likely. But to me, the only thing that Congress could really do is the next time they have the opportunity to confirm Chief Justice nominee is to ask for some guarantees that person would, if in that office, would make some structural reforms to the court that involve transparency in matters like this. And I would
what structural reforms would you recommend? Would you want?
That's a great question. I'd have to think about that a little bit more, certainly, but I would certainly argue, at least just off the top of my head, to say one of those reforms would be fuller financial disclosure, would be clear recusal rules. Not saying that other people could force a Supreme Court justice to recuse, but that there would be clear recusal standards, more disclosure standards,
right lines that you could look to. Yeah.
My argument essentially is that given that there are virtually no real checks on the justices, because once you're in, essentially. There's impeachment and removal, but again, such a blunt instrument that in exchange for that, it's not unreasonable to demand an even greater degree of transparency about financial dealings, about conflicts of interest and things like that. So I think that's entirely reasonable. And that's certainly something, if I were in the Senate questioning a potential nominee for Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, that would be something I would insist upon as a condition of my yes vote.
Yeah, okay, fair enough. But that still doesn't get you your leak report.
No, that chip is, that's a little different thing, because that's obviously we hope that's a one-off sort of thing, right? Because the idea that somebody would leak a decision private, that unprecedented is, I think, a fair word to use. And that gets more to...
That's the word.
Yeah, it would be very difficult to design some sort of a structure to prevent that kind of thing. God knows that administrators have tried.
Right. That's sort of why I asked. Yeah. Because I think, the program, the policy, the reforms was don't leak stuff. And I'm not sure what else you could do to... Yeah.
Exactly. So, I think that is a much more difficult sort of thing for sure. But I don't really see that happening. John Roberts isn't going anywhere. And I think the Supreme Court will remain essentially unaccountable for the foreseeable future.
As perhaps as it should.
Well, maybe so. Anyway, so let's move on to kind of a related thing, because we're talking about the judiciary. So I thought this would be a good point to look at how much influence President Biden's appointments have had over. He's had almost 2 years now to make appointments, and of course, for most folks, I would guess the only appointment people are familiar with by name would be Justice Jackson, and that really didn't have much of an effect, right, because it kept that same 6-3 Republican to Democrat appointee balance in place. But if we pull back a little bit and look at overall judicial confirmations, Biden has had more of an effect, I would argue, because he's had 97 confirmations to this point. That's higher than either Trump at 85 or Obama at 62 at this 2-year mark. And in addition to Justice Jackson, how it breaks down, he's had 28 appeals court judges and 68 district court judges confirmed. Now, to put those numbers in perspective, there are 677 district court judgeships that are authorized by Congress, 179 circuit court judgeships. So what that means is that just over 10% of district court judges and 15% of circuit court judges are now Biden appointees. Trump-confirmed judges at this point make up just under 30% of the circuit courts, 25% of the district courts, and then there's Obama with 33% district courts, 21% of the appellate judges. And my expectation, Jay, is that given that the Democrats have one additional seat in the 118th Congress in the Senate, I don't see anything that would stop the pace of confirmations. And I would expect that by the time his term ends, Biden appointees should be somewhere around a third of the appellate courts and somewhere the low to mid 20% range for the district courts, which is kind of like along the lines of what Senate Republicans managed to do under Donald Trump. What's your take on that?
I think that's the numbers kind of speak for themselves. Yeah. Elections have consequences.
There you go. But where Biden is very different from Donald Trump is in the diversity area. For instance, 3/4 of the judges he's nominated and have had confirmed have been women. Around 2/3 have been people of color. And that includes 11 black women confirmed as circuit court judges, which is more than the number of black women confirmed as circuit court judges by all previous presidents combined. So that's a really big difference. And the Biden administration from the get-go said, we are committed to diversifying the federal courts in terms of gender, in terms of race. What do you think about the racial and gender diversity focus from President Biden, which again is much more than any previous president by a long shot, Democrat or Republican?
As with these things where I usually am, I'm troubled when the first qualification that one goes looking for is skin color or gender or anything like that. I think we talked about this back when Biden said, I'm going to, Supreme Court appointees, I'm going to appoint a black woman. That's troubling for a lot of reasons. And it's not a matter of, on the one hand, I support the idea of diversifying the judiciary, right? That there ought to be, it shouldn't all just look like white men. There ought to be people of all races, genders, religions, present and represented. And because I think that goes to sort of the public view of the legitimacy of the judiciary. So I think that's important. But emphasizing it to the extent that the Biden administration has, I think is a problem.
See,
right? That's like the first criteria.
I will disagree somewhat. Obviously, I agree with you on the importance of having for legitimacy reasons, but also I would argue because different backgrounds, different experiences. Women bring different things to a position than men. People of color to.
Yeah, see, I've never bought into that.
I think it's just true as a matter of fact. But anyway, the idea that the experience of a man and the experience of a woman is going to be entirely different, or it's going to be entirely the same, and that they are.
Well, how does that affect your reading of precedent of the job of a judge?
Because the idea that the job of the judge is to be some sort of computing machine and to even, I know there's this fiction on some folks in the right that, well, we just look at the text, we just look at the intent. But the fact of the matter is that in so many ways, the job of judging is a subjective judge, especially, I would argue, at the district court level where most of these appointments are being made. And so therefore,
that's a good point on the district court, what we're talking about district, because again, district court judges, it's a different job than an appellate and Supreme Court judge.
And that's where most of these cases start and stop, in fact. So I think, but to the second, but where I would disagree with you is that the Biden administration is starting from there. To me, there is a large pool of people who are eminently well qualified to be a federal judge. For instance, Jay, if you were nominated to be a federal judge, I would be perfectly. I think you would do a fine job. Thank
you. I appreciate that.
Well, there you go. And there are thousands of people like you out there, from representing both Democrats and Republicans who could step in. Oh, I think there are thousands actually, because there are something like 900 authorized judgeships.
You're always saying how I'm unique in my my word. But go ahead.
I believe there are thousands of people who any Democrat or Republican could pick. And so just saying that, well, of these thousands of people who are all eminently qualified, let's take from this eminently qualified pool someone who brings something additional, like, for instance, gender diversity or racial diversity, that sort of thing. So to me, that's not denigrating, that's not lowering the quality of the judiciary. It's just picking from an otherwise entirely qualified pool. And that's where I think I disagree with you. I don't think that they're saying that, well, we will pick a woman or we will pick a...
That's what he said. But
yes. My point, though, maybe I'm not articulating it well enough, is that, yes, but that doesn't affect the quality of the judging if the pool in general is all very well qualified. So what?
Agreed. No, agreed. But
okay.
That gets back to my it's still the again, looking at the numbers and thinking back to the Jackson nomination and the statements he made there, it's such a plain sort of we're going to pick the most qualified person who fits our demographic profile.
And I say, so what? If the most qualified person who fits our demographic profile is very well qualified and is as well qualified as, say, several dozen white males who I might have picked, so what?
Because it's generally bad form to hire people based on their race or their gender.
But it's not based on their race or their gender. And that's,
I think, a lot offensive to a lot of people.
So
it's in terms of look, if you're saying, I think it does no one any good all the way around.
I guess I'm not following your argument, because on one hand, you said that you believe that race and gender diversity in the courts is a good thing, at least for legitimacy reasons. So given the fact that you believe that, you are arguing against selecting people who bring race and gender. You see what I'm saying? I guess, how would we...
I'm objecting to making that the highest goal, the first goal, which is what I think President Biden has explicitly said he's trying to do. To me, it shouldn't matter of the. I mean, can you imagine the idea of you file a lawsuit and you're like, well, your first question is, well, hey, what color's the judge?
Well, no, of course not.
I mean, my God, that's. I think that would.
I don't think that goes to your point, though, because the point to me is that now, yes, I would agree with you if, for instance, said, well, we have these really highly qualified white males, and we have a distinctly less qualified Hispanic female. We're going to pick
you're saying, I get that. There's a whole pool of people who are qualified.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so why not just of that qualified pool, focus on picking more minorities so that there's greater representation.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. So and I guess maybe my problem with that, maybe it's more of one of degree rather than principle, right?
Okay.
If your first question is so say you get the resumes in of here are our potential folks who are interested in the job. If your first question is which ones are the minorities, that troubles me. If you elevate that criteria above,
okay, I think hear what you're saying
from that qualified pool.
Okay, I think hear what you're saying. If especially if you're focusing on a legitimacy issue, if there are a significant number of folks who believe that federal judges were chosen based on more than anything else, based on their color, based on their gender, and that means that that more qualified people are not being selected, even if that's true or not, if that's the perception because of how the messaging is going out. All right, that seems reasonable to me. Okay, I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Look, I think each judge has a great individual story that he or she can tell, right? For one thing, I think it would be great if the Biden administration has, and this has been sort of quiet, right? There's been more appointments from folks from like the public defense bar bench, right? Have been appointed than prior, and part of that's more just it's an ideological thing, and but there's something sensible to that too, and likewise, this is sort of my prejudice is I would like to see more judges who have civil, litigation experience, right? That's sort of a common argument or complaint that you get these judges who just kind of spent their whole lives in the prosecutor's office, and then they're dropped into there's a big civil antitrust case or something, and but a lot of these folks have great personal stories to tell. And I guess my complaint is when you just look at that one criteria, you overlook some other people who might have some great personal stories, and you send the message that this is what's most important to us, and I think that's a bad message to send.
I don't entirely agree, but I think it's not an unreasonable point. I'll say that. So, and just kind of to pull back a little bit more to give folks a sense, kind of since we're talking about the state of the judiciary, right now there are 408 federal judges who've been appointed by Democratic presidents to 280 that have been appointed by Republicans, and there are 82 seats that are vacant, according to the last stats that I have. There are almost always a bunch of vacancies going on there. Though I should point out that number is kind of misleading, because you look at that, it's like, oh my God, there's just all these Democrats. Yes, but that's a 6-3 Republican appointee majority on the Supreme Court. And also, if you look at the circuit courts, there were 13 of them. 7 have Democratic president-appointed majorities, including that sort of D.C. circuit, which is kind of the first among equals, if you will, circuit court. They have 7 Democratic president-appointed members to 4 Republicans. And so now, again, the Supreme Court's what matters the most.
We could have a discussion about the D.C. circuit. And how it got there and Obama's appointments, but that's for another day.
But I'm saying people might not, that might be kind of surprising, kind of how many more. But generally speaking, once you get a federal judge in place, it's not like they're going to say, "Hey, maybe I should go get a job at Hardee's or something like that." It's a good job, and they certainly earned them, and there are lifetime appointments for a reason, and so they tend not to move around a whole lot after that point. And so, which is why you have this history of, you still have a bunch of Clinton people, Obama people, and so that's why you have so many of these still Democratic. And that doesn't even get into judges who are in senior status, who count but don't exactly count, and it gets a little, right? So yeah. But so I'm saying Democrats, there are still plenty of us out there in the courts, so good thing. But anyway, so before we go today, I thought we could close with some recommendations. What do you got for us, Jay?
Oh my gosh, I thought you were going to lead off because I can lead off. What can I possibly recommend?
Not a problem.
Go ahead. I
have something fun to recommend. It's a show called Year of the Rabbit. It stars Matt Berry. I don't know if you know Matt Berry. He is people will know him a lot more as the vampire Laszlo in What We Do in the Shadows. I don't know if you've seen What We Do in the Shadows.
Okay, that's my recommendation. I love What We Do in the Shadows.
Okay. well, it's if you take that character and you make him a Victorian era detective in London, you get Year of the Rabbit. Basically, it is just filthy. It is hilarious. They only made 6 episodes, or like 20-something minutes. They were going to do a second season, but it was like COVID hit, and then they didn't. But it was just so much fun. I've had so much serious downer kind of stuff going on. It was just wonderful to just take a little break from it all. It was just a fun little find, and you have to get BritBox to get it, but you probably get a free trial. I don't know, but anyway, totally worth it. There are only 6 episodes, so that's like 3 hours. There's not even 3 hours of viewing, but a lot of fun, and I highly recommend Year of the Rabbit. So, Jay, and your recommendation?
Okay. No, I've come. I
kind of thought.
A colleague of mine, /client of mine, is very much a adventurer, and he is, as we speak, climbing the tallest summit in Antarctica. He's taken this
Wow.
month-long trip. And it's a crazy trip even just to get there, to climb this mountain. But anyway, as a Christmas gift, he got me the Ernest Shackleton, the story Endurance.
Okay, yeah.
About the Shackleton expedition, which the book actually came out in like the 1950s, but it was kind of repopularized in the 90s. So that's what I read sort of over Christmas, and when we had the deep freeze, howling winds. Negative temperatures here. I
Bomb cyclone, yeah.
Endurance. And if you haven't read it, it's one of those that it's just astounding. Of look back to the days when ships were made of wood and men were made of iron type thing,
Yeah.
right?
Uh-huh.
Because it's incredible how these guys survive. And I'm thinking, like, I'm sitting here in Cleveland, and we had winds of like 50-mile-an-hour winds, and wind chills of negative 20 and stuff like that. And you read about what these guys are going through, and some of the sailing rescues where they're absolutely soaked to the bone, and it's like 50 knot winds. Times 100 knot winds, on the Southern Ocean. I mean, it's absolutely insane. But they survived, and
some of them, at least.
Spoiler alert.
Yeah. Yes.
No, all of them survived.
All of them, every single one. No kidding.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. And yeah, it's absolutely. You're just like, how can there's like one guy has a heart attack, and then they're like, well, he had a heart attack the other day, but
Yeah.
a couple days off, he's back at it. You know what I mean? Sort of thing.
Yeah. Well, that book is sitting right now, probably 20 feet away from me on my bookshelf. I have not read it yet. I got it as a gift a few years ago, but maybe I'll move that up on my list thanks to your recommendation. So there we go.
Yeah. And again, it's just one of all those, you everything you read through this and you think, okay, now they're finally got stuff sorted out, and then something else goes wrong, and like, what else can possibly go wrong?
It's got to be something, because there's 100 more pages.
They just get through it. Yeah.
There's a getaway.
So that's my recommendation.
All right. Finally, before we go, I want to thank Kalina and Andrew for their recent and very generous support. And also, again, there were a few people at the very end of December who gave some very generous support to Trey. And thanks so much. I checked in with Trey just a few days ago, and he actually posted a thing on our Discord saying he is still back on track to be back on the show in February, and we are very much looking forward to having him back. So we're going now. Jay, you and I still have a bonus midweek show to do, and we have a lot to talk about. Yeah, I mentioned Trump's taxes, looking forward to 2023. Maybe some stuff on George Santos and the lying liars who run the GOP. A crazy idea to enlarge the House. A lot of stuff. I'm looking forward to it. And if you are a supporter, that will be in your feed midweek. And if you're not, hey, we hope you consider becoming a supporter, because you get that and a lot of other good stuff like ad-free versions of everything we put out, that midweek show. And so, you can find out more about that by going to patreon.com/politicsguys. And if you'd like to support us on Venmo, we're at Politics Guys. And you can also support the show through PayPal. All of those links are in the show notes every week, as well as at politicsguys.com/support. And if you would like to get that midweek show, but you are not in a position to financially support us, totally not a problem. Just send me an email. I'm Mike@politicsguys.com, and I will get you set up with that. And whether you're a supporter or not, it really does help to rate and review the podcast on whatever app you happen to be listening on, subscribing, and sharing episodes on social media. And if you want to get in touch with us for any reason whatsoever, you can do that at mail@politicsguys.com. We're also on Facebook and Twitter, and you will find links to that in the show notes every week. And finally, a special thanks to our executive producers, Bruce Johnson, Wilma Moreno, Andra Masker, Daniel Toe, Ryan Beasley, and Don Oglesby. We'll be back with a new episode for you next week. We hope you join us.